Okay, right. Well, hello, welcome, Kate. This is the first of a series of recordings and short videos designed to help our parents through the challenges, trials and tribulations of parenting, certainly through a pandemic, and into going into post-pandemic, hopefully. So I'm going to be joined on these videos, everyone, by Dr. Kate Middleton. Kate is a local parent and a psychologist, but obviously I'll let you introduce yourself, Kate, so when you're ready.
Hi, Rian. Thank you so much. And it's really good to be with everyone, even though it's not possible to do it in person, but it's brilliant to spend this time with you. Like you say, I'm a psychologist. I'm local to the school, so I live just down the road in Hitchin, and I'm mum to a 15-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old. But I'm also a psychologist, and I work with an organisation called the Mind and Soul Foundation. And really my main passion and interest is about helping people manage difficult emotions and life's testing times so that they can not just survive the pressures of 21st century life, but really thrive, them and their children, their friends, whoever they're supporting. So I guess for me, global pandemic has been an extreme and slightly unusual and unexpected example of that. And it's certainly been a time when myself and my colleagues have been very busy supporting people from all kinds of different backgrounds, all different ages, and just sharing tips and tricks really to help people get through this season.
I can't believe that we're coming into the year anniversary, really, when we went into that initial lockdown. And who would have known that 12 months later, you know, we've just come out of yet another lockdown where the kids haven't been at school. What do you think has been the biggest challenge during this time?
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? I think all of us probably are finding ourselves doing that thing at the moment where you think, what was I doing a year ago today? And then you just think, how naive was I? I can't believe I went to that meeting or spent that evening with friends or whatever it was. And pandemic felt like it came out of nowhere. It was a huge surprise to most of us, and obviously a totally unexpected season. And I think there's probably three main things. I mean, everybody's situation is different, obviously, but all of us have been dealing with three sort of main challenges. And the first one is just the increase in our stress levels. Yeah. You know, stress is about so much more than just distress.
Yeah.
It's about the level of demand and challenge that life is placing on your brain and your body. And in normal times, your mind actually uses rhythm and routine to keep your stress baseline low. It's a bit like climbing a wall, but you know where all the handholds are, and you don't really have to think about it. And pandemic really just totally transformed our daily life, like climbing the wall, but all the handholds are gone, and there's new obstacles and things that we have to navigate. And even worse, every time you've worked it out, something changes. There's a new boulder, or you can't use a handhold that you used to. So that constant change and the adjustment that it requires means that everybody's baseline stress level rose. And you can kind of think of that physiological stress level because it's a complex system that balances your response to stress. But it's like the water level in a pool, and we all have a crisis level where the stress or the challenge or what life is throwing at us is literally close to exceeding our mind's capacity to cope with it. You know, we're not superhuman, we're not machines, we do have limits. And because our baseline is raised, many people have been just uncomfortably aware that they've been living very close to that overwhelm point for nearly a year now. And that is exhausting. And the second challenge is about negative emotions. And I think particularly things like loss and anxiety and frustration, which have been so much part of this season. And pandemic has triggered a lot of these emotions, but it's in an unusual context where we actually can't control or change the situation or the context that's causing them. So what we've had to learn to do is just manage those emotions, sometimes suppress them, distract ourselves, just hold them over quite an extended period of time. And as humans, we can do that in short term, but the longer we try to do that, the harder it gets. So dealing with the frustration, say, of trying to work and homeschool at the same time. Gosh, is my household pleased that schools have gone back this week? It just feels blissfully empty. So that's so hard. other things like anguish of missing people, not being able to be with them, things that keep coming up, but there's nothing we can do, anxiety when we don't know what the future will bring. And the more that time moves on and we keep having to do this, holding those emotions down is a bit like trying to keep a beach ball under the water in a swimming pool. You know, it's hard work, and it actually demands quite a lot of our brain's focus and attention. But the more you try to do it, you think you're doing quite well, and then suddenly up one of those emotions comes, and it bubbles to the top. And that's often in ways that are particularly difficult. So when you are feeling vulnerable or exhausted, or you've had and for another reason, you've had a really rubbish day, or directed at some poor soul in your household who doesn't even deserve whatever emotion is unleashed at them. And, you know, those emotions don't just go away. Their job is to get your brain's attention. So that's become an ongoing challenge. And of course, many of those emotions work on that same physiological stress system that I was just talking about. So if your baseline is already very near overwhelm, a little emotional trigger, the sort of thing that normally you would handle with no trouble, a little deal becomes a very big deal. And that's for us and for our children. I know as a parent, sometimes I've asked something really quite little of my children and seen them just dissolve in front of me or erupt in a way that they never normally would. And I think we're all seeing each other more prickly, more reactive. And then thirdly, I think just in general, exhaustion and weariness is a big issue, because this has been going on for nearly a year, like you say, you can believe it. And we know that humans actually respond really well to short-term crisis, that kind of head down, get on with it mentality. And in fact, what it brings out in human beings is that beautiful creativity, the pulling together, the sort of social conscience, all the stuff we saw in the first lockdown. But over time, all of those things take a lot of effort and energy, and the more tired you get, the more stressed you get, the more difficult it gets, the more you start to reach the limits of your capacity, the limits of your creativity. And I think we probably all have noticed the difference in this third lockdown. People are more retreating into their own spaces. They're struggling to maintain friendships and contacts. Zoom fatigue is a huge thing. Thing is that's what we're recording this on. But we are all tired and very aware that we feel that we're reaching our limits. Probably one of the things I hear most from people is just a worry over what if this carries on, and people saying, I don't know how much longer I can do this.
No, that's right. And I think for adults, we've got that life experience, so we're always thinking, what if this, what if that? So we're all we're always catastrophizing everything, and we've got no control over actually what has been happening. So how do you think that specifically it's affected children?
Well, that's actually quite an interesting question, because as you just said, our experience and our awareness of things like our responsibility and our expectation over whether we should be able to control or change things is very different as adults compared to what it is as a child. You know, when you're a child, a lot of life is up for grabs. If you think of the sort of expectation and foundational beliefs that you have about the world that you build your life on, children haven't formed those yet.
No.
So if the whole world changes like this, it challenges a lot less for an under 11-year-old child, or even a sort of young adolescent. Those sorts of foundational beliefs are generally formed in around mid-adolescence. So really, those sort of aged children and young people are much more adaptive. They're much happier to be creative, to play around with what life looks like. And actually can pick up in quite dramatic changes and get used to them remarkably quickly. So whilst they might feel anxiety leading up to a change, once they get going, it's amazing how quickly they forget what came before and just move into it. So of course they struggle with some of the same things we do. You know, they miss people, they've had to adjust their behavior. Some of our children are very, very tired just from having to deal with all the change, and they do listen, so they are aware of what's being said on the media and things like that. But what they don't have, as you say, is the sort of anguish that we hold, particularly as parents, that might be the anguish of worrying about what's coming, but it's also the anguish around the impact that this has had, the way it's changed their world. You know, particularly for my 8-year-old, because he is younger and because it's been more challenging for him for lots of You know, as a parent, I just ache to see how this has affected him. He was a hugely energetic little boy, and he was a little boy when it went into lockdown. It feels like he's done nothing but grow for a year. But you know, not being able to see his friends, not being able to play football or rugby, not being able to run around, missing school. He spent so much more time gaming and online. It has changed him, changed his outlook on life and the world. And I find that difficult, but I'm also frustrated by the fact that I can't stop that happening. So I think we need to recognize that some of what we're feeling as parents, to be honest, our kids aren't feeling. So he doesn't have to manage that. I do, he doesn't. And that's important, because actually, perhaps one of the biggest things that we need to deal with as parents is our own reactions and our own emotional responses, as well as thinking about our kids. But in the same way, the sort of flip side of that is that for children, we need to recognize that this next season, where we really hope that it will be about returning to something much more normal, for us, that might feel like it's largely a sense of relief, just getting back into our normal rhythm. For children, that is another change. It's an adjustment that was as big as going into the first lockdown, because they've moved on. You know, my son talks about, oh, do you remember the time when? And he'll talk about things we used to do, like it was just a previous life. He's moved on from that now. So to go back to those things will be a big adjustment for our children.
And they have to relearn to socialize and compromise and all these things that they have not been doing whilst they've been on their own or with just their siblings. And there's been quite a lot in the press about, you know, the catching up that children, you know, have to do about after lockdown. And some of the press has said, you know, don't frame it as catching up, because that immediately puts a negative connotation onto the children. They have to catch up with something. What sort of advice do you have for some of the parents hopefully watching and thinking, you know, we've missed so much, how are we going to catch up?
It's tricky, isn't it? And as parents, we are so aware of how we feel like it has changed things for our children. And I think, interestingly, as a psychologist, my concern is much more about the impact on social and relational skills and experience. Certainly for that sort of, what you sort of call up to 11, that sort of pre-adolescent, up to 11, 12-ish age group. Because such an important part of life then is just mucking in with other kids, playing, getting to know other children, doing those relationships. Some children have been able to adapt quite well and do that online, and actually have found that those skills transfer very easily. Others have found it much harder, or maybe haven't had the access to online tech equipment and stuff, so a bit more withdrawn. So I think there's perhaps a bigger concern in that space than academic stuff. It's easy to focus on academic stuff and think, oh goodness, you know, look, my son's handwriting was never great before this, but honestly, because he's basically spent a large part of this year typing. And I was on a call with some older teenagers the other day, and they were talking about that, just the challenges of how they can't write anymore. So there are some things, there's going to be a stage of adapting. But I think what we need to do is just have a bit of balance. You know, if you listen to media reports, we have to remember that the type of news that catches your attention, and so the things that parents share to one another, or that we remember, or we focus on, or even just what the media choose to put in their headlines, it's negative stories. They do that better, they spread better, they catch us better. And actually, it's not all negative. So for the vast majority of children, whilst this will have shaped them, it won't have devastated and destroyed their life. You know, I think of it a bit like the lines in the cliffs. If you go and visit some of the seaside towns in Dorset, you see these amazing cliffs, and you can see lines which mark a significant geological event. Now, with our children, this will shape them, and we might see aspects of them and the way they approach life where we think, oh yes, they learned that in pandemic, but it needn't all be negative. In fact, there's evidence from some research looking at previous generations who've grown up in very challenging times, so particularly the Second World War. And actually what that tells us is that growing up in testing times can do something really unexpected.
Okay.
Because it teaches children a greater skill set around things like adaptivity, creativity, and potential. And it builds strengths in their key relationships that perhaps wouldn't have been built otherwise. I've seen a lot more of my kids in the last year than I would have done normally. And human psychology shows us that, particularly for children and teenagers, our baseline as we're growing up is to believe that if life gets tough, we're basically helpless, because as a very small child, you don't have a lot of control. But as you grow and you become more aware, more able, more capable, you're exposed to more challenge. If you're supported well through that, what you learn is that actually you can have influence, and actually that you're more capable than you thought. You can do some fairly impressive things the more you dig deep. So there's the potential in this sort of season, if we support our children really well, that not only do they find skills that help them in the moment because it lifts their mood and just helps them manage a difficult day, but also that they're growing capability for the future that will raise their resilience. And that can be a really empowering thing. You know, Captain Sir Tom Moore was such a great example of that amazing man who raised all the money walking around his garden, and he of course was, as a young man, was in the forces in World War II, and I think that challenging season probably taught him some of the amazing skills that we saw when faced with another difficult moment in his life all those decades later. And in fact, this ability, if you like, to hold hope, to hold positivity, to hold good things and get you through, it's literally been called that. The circuit in the brain that's involved in all of those skills and resilience is often called the hope circuit.
Oh, is it?
So we can, not only does this not necessarily need to be all negative, but maybe in this season our kids are going to take something really unexpected out of this time of pressure and release potential, possibilities, things, discover things that they wouldn't have learned otherwise. So I guess, should I do sort of 3 top tips?
Yeah, great.
I am a parent myself. Let me just say, I'm a parent, I'm a psychologist. I sometimes enjoy being the psychologist more because I'm more often right. But these are my sort of 3 top tips for parents. The first one is just try not to repeat the negative messages you hear and speak. You hear on the media. Be careful about what you leave on when. I've had to get better at this, not leaving the radio on. Particularly my older teen. I know she's a bit older than the children of a lot of the parents at Kingshott, but she really listens. And some of your older children, they will listen to this stuff. And we do need to be careful. Our kids' attitude and their response is so strongly shaped by what they see, what they hear, and particularly our own response. So just watch what language you use, watch what language they're hearing. Try to focus and make sure they're aware of the things that they have done. And just, it's not about denying the presence of the difficult things, it's just about that balance. So it is all bad, there is some good stuff too, and the bad is not overwhelmingly dominant. The second thing I would say is, don't forget your own needs. You know, it's so easy as a parent, we're so focused on our children, what must we be doing? And if we're not careful, we exhaust ourselves even more because we're so anxious about that. But our children's emotional responses to a situation like this are shaped by what they see from us as the significant adults in their life. It's like when you're on a plane and you hear a funny noise, you look straight at the stewards and the stewardesses, and if they don't look worried, you don't worry, do you?
No, that's right.
And that's basically what children do. So if you're okay, they feel like things are okay, even if it's a bit weird, if it's a bit unpredictable, if things have changed. So we need to be careful, and particularly in those moments where there's things that are really hard for us but not for them, not that we deny the presence of those emotions, but that we find good spaces to express them, to process, to talk them through, so that then we're in a really good position to support our kids. And that we also manage things like our stress and our exhaustion levels. You know, in lockdown, which thankfully we're coming out of for kids now, they're back at school, but I'm aware that one of the most difficult things for children isn't all the change. In my household, it was when I was stressed, so I was shouty. When we talked about lockdown 1 and I said to my son, what was the hardest thing? He said, well, Mummy, you were very shouty. And I had to realize he's right. But one of my biggest priorities going into lockdown 3 was that I put together a plan so that I was doing better,
right.
because then my kids did much better. You know, the atmosphere in our household is so important. So just remember that the best thing you can do for your kids might be something that's about looking after you, and weirdly it might be getting away from them for a bit, going for that walk, taking the bath, getting a nice evening together, whatever it is that helps you. And then I guess thirdly, for kids, it is about helping them to do that expressing and processing too, creating good spaces where they can chat and share and express and process, and recognizing they don't know what all these weird feelings that they're having, even the physical sort of symptoms of the stress that they're carrying and some of the emotions they're feeling. So particularly for younger children, our job as parents is to help them name and understand those emotions, and to learn, how do you manage them? What do you do when you feel sad or anxious, or you've had a rubbish day? And one thing that research is bringing out more and more is the way that for children, sometimes those emotions come out in unexpected ways because they don't know what they're feeling. They just know they don't feel right.
Yeah.
So we see those emotions often expressed in behavioral issues. So I'm afraid it's the things that as parents we find hardest. It's our kids being argumentative, whiny, just difficult, misbehaving. And a lot of parents are saying that they're seeing more of that than normal, which again is why we need to be at the top of our game, so we can try to stay calm and support our kids in those moments. Not excusing bad behavior, because they do need to learn. But trying to understand, sitting down with them sometimes and saying, listen, you know, how it feels to me like perhaps you're not feeling quite your normal self right now. How's things going? And just thinking about how we can support them to talk that stuff through and understand it a bit better.
I think the looking after ourselves is a really important message, really important. And I think also the thought about that this possibly has built resilience is so positive, you know. And it's interesting for you to say that Captain Tom could have learnt some of the things that he then passed on now when he was, you know, a soldier or whatever he was in World War II. That's really, you know, it's a really interesting. For the children that are struggling, what advice for them?
Yeah, and we'll talk in future weeks about some of the key
some of the struggles,
challenges that we're seeing for children, and some specifics around how we can support them. I think in general, it is about how we create those spaces and help them to talk and process. Some of this processing is literally about sort of rearranging their understanding in their minds. And for younger children, it might be the first time they've understood some of these things. For older children, it might need a bit of a rearrange. So think about when they can do that, first of all. So can you create some times and spaces where the pressure's off, where they can talk or do other things that will help them process? So where there aren't distractions, where there's no other demands, and that could be, you know, the pressure of you're supposed to be doing homework, tidying your room, or it could just be siblings, distractions. So going for a good walk, sitting with them in their room, creating time and space maybe that's about individual parents with individual children, I know can be really valuable. So, you know, we have sort of daddy-daughter day, mum Sunday, and my elder daughter and I go on what she calls existential crisis coffee dates, where she just tells me all the things that are stressing her out, you know. So think about how you can play with that time. You know, older kids go for coffee or ice cream is great. Younger kids, it's about creating play spaces and sort of really focused time with them. The second thing is about how then. So for older kids, you can do conversation, but they generally don't like intense conversation. So as adults, we sort of like to sit opposite each other and let's have a good conversation. And that can just feel too overwhelming, particularly once they hit sort of very early adolescence. So think about things where you're not face to face. So walks are great, which is handy right now because there's not a lot else that we can do. Or other situations maybe where you're cooking. I don't, you know, so often when I'm cooking, that'll be when my kids come in and start chatting to me, and it's the dialed down intensity that does that.
Yeah.
For younger kids, you might need to try and create some hooks that they can sort of hang their processing on. So that might be play or creativity. So maybe drawing or literally playing with figures, you know, their Sylvanias or Roblox figures or Lego or whatever it is that they're into, depending on their age. And creating a little family and just acting out, playing out scenarios. What's mum doing? What's dad doing? Or how's that little boy feeling now? And sometimes that detachedness for children helps them to sort of play out some of what's been going on in their head. And drawing can do the same thing really as well. So sometimes think about those creative approaches. But I would guess also think about who. The reality is that sometimes as parents, we're not the best people for our kids to share with. Sometimes we are, which is amazing. And it's such a privilege when they do come to us. But as they get older, once they hit adolescence, their job is to start to detach from us. Even when they're younger, I think sometimes their awareness of our emotions, they don't want to upset us. If we're struggling with something, they don't want to come and talk to us about it because of that. So I think trying to be comfortable with the fact that sometimes it's good for our kids to go elsewhere and really proactively strengthening and building those relationships. You know, if you've got great aunts or uncles or godparents or youth workers or older, you know, friends who've got older children, any of those sorts of relationships, support them where you can. I've just given both my kids some coffee vouchers for this. Once the coffee shops, I think we're allowed to now, aren't we? We can sit down and drink coffee together. And so I've said, you know, use these to go out with a friend or with you know, one of your adult friends and hang out, chat, catch up, because you've not seen them for a long time. So whatever you can do to support those relationships, set up the Zoom, invite them around if they're in your bubble, whatever you can do it, because the wider your children's support circle, the better. In this season.
And ultimately, you know, as long as they're talking to a trusted person, a trusted adult, then that is, you know, that is really important, isn't it? That at least they are sharing. Talking
in the lighter sense of the word as well, because sometimes just sitting with someone through something, that is emotional support. And we know as adults, a lot of our processing is actually done in silence. It's thinking, for us as adults, maybe journaling or listening to podcasts or whatever it is that we do. But so for our children too, going for a walk and not talking about anything in particular, but just the fact that it's really valuable time where they feel loved and secure. Some of that also helps to process some of the more difficult things that they're dealing with. And of course, to drop their stress levels, which will help everything.
Thanks, Kate. That's really good for a first video. I think that's excellent. So we're going to do a series of these. So I'm going to invite parents to, if they've got questions, they can email me at rburrows@kingshotschool.com, the usual email address that I have. So I'm going to invite them to, if they can think of things that they'd like to talk about, or they would like you to cover specific questions, and then over a series of weeks we can cover some of these things. We'll continue after Easter as well. So next week we'll release the second one. And what are we going to be talking about next week?
Well, I thought it would be good to talk about probably the most common emotional challenge that parents will be seeing, and that's for them as well as for their kids, which is sort of anxiety. Worry, uncertainty, all of that sort of clump of emotions. So we'll be thinking, how do you deal with those emotions, but also for your kids, how do you respond when they come to you because they're worried or scared, or when you just see that they're worried or scared or avoiding something? So how do you reassure, and how do you stop anxiety growing and becoming a bigger problem? Because there's some really useful practical tips and guidance that we can share on that.
Okay, that's brilliant. Well, what I'll do is I'm going to send out an email letting obviously staff know. It'll be me or Mr. Weston that does that, and then we'll invite questions, but then we'll perhaps do them the final week before half term, before Easter break, and then we'll go from there. So I'll put everything out. They can email in, and hopefully these will be helpful to everyone. Thanks so much, Kate, for sharing everything.
No, it's great to spend the time with you.
Thank you.